This is Tomorrowpictures.TV.
All right, in an effort to stay on schedule, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here tonight, again, to our Winthrope Athletics Town Hall, Knowing Our Place in History. I just want to go over a few housekeeping items with you. The first is to thank our Winthrope Athletics Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. That group of coaches and administrators really worked hard to make this event happen, and we appreciate all of their work on that. Please be aware that you're going to get a post-event survey via email. We're really looking forward to having your voice heard through that process about tonight's event and anything else moving forward that we would look to have in this space under the Winthrope Athletics Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. Please use the chat and raise your hand feature for any questions once we get to that portion of the program. We're going to start with a conversation between myself and Frederick, and I am recording that portion of the conversation. Once we turn it over to questions and answers, I will stop recording. So that'll be a safe and a brave space for anyone to ask questions, whether it's through the chat. You can send them to me directly if you would like it to be anonymous, or you can put it in the group chat or raise your hand and we can turn the floor over to you in this virtual event. The other piece, because this is for cultural event credit, please remember we have certain guidelines that we must adhere to for you to receive the credit for it. And that is to be sure that everyone is logged in individually. We're unable to give credit for people sharing a device. Plus that isn't very socially distant. So hopefully you're all logged in individually in your own space. And we're asking you to use your first and last name as your username that we can see, because that is the only way we are able to go through and give credit is if your first and last name are displayed. Please keep your camera on the entire event and be present where we can see you in that view, because that is how this works. We do understand it's the first virtual event of this semester, so we wanted to be sure to go over those guidelines so you're aware of it. And then just also wanted to share that our hope as the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Working Group within athletics is that we will actually be able to screen this full documentary as state and campus and federal guidelines would eventually allow, given the pandemic currently going on. So be on the lookout for that as well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our esteemed guest, Frederick Taylor. I really liked this quote from him: applying art to the changing times. As you can see, he has a very prestigious degree from the documentary filmmaking program at Temple University, and then went on to graduate studies at Georgia State. He also serves as faculty at multiple institutions in the area of fine arts. And you can see some of the work he's done with celebrities in the music area, but then also he works in the corporate space with commercials and not-for-profits and some of those other entities that we're going to hear about. So he is, these are his passion projects when we talk about the documentaries, social justice, and really filling that space there. And so what we're about to do now is we're going to watch the trailer for this award-winning documentary, Counter Stories, Rock Hill, that's been featured in many film festivals. And again, he is just an award-winning director, and we're gonna watch this together to kind of set the tone for the conversation we're gonna have tonight with Frederick. So, here we go.
You don't leave after a warrant issued for your arrest and charge you trespassing.
He suddenly put up his hands and said, "Oh, you're not going to do that to me." Anybody who's been a Negro for long knows what that means.
Let us be united for peace.
We have come a long, long way, but we still have a long, long way to go.
Tomorrow Pictures.
And that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened.
It is time to heal America.
Its purpose is not to divide, but to end division.
The birthright of all humanity.
Let it be said by our children's children that when we were tested, we refused to let this journey end.
And if democracy is to live, segregation must die.
Jail, no bail.
That conscience was stirred by men and women who held sit-ins at lunch counters.
The Friendship 9.
Those times were very scary times.
We could have been killed any moment. People are being lynched every day.
Racism, it is not inherited, it is taught.
A lot of people don't realize how far-reaching or deep-seated that is for both races, white and colored.
Change of heart will change of mind.
I couldn't realize why could I not sit down at the lunch counter with other people.
And we just got tired of that and not being treated like citizens of the city.
We had made up our mind enough was enough.
You agitators, white and colored, want to change it.
Ride, freedom, ride. If you want to be free, ride on.
What in the hell are you doing here?
In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
It takes time, but time's too slow. Now this old jazz has got to go.
In 1961, 9 courageous men changed history forever.
I see only one face. That is the face of the future.
As soon as I sat on the stool, I was slammed to the floor by the officer.
And we were locked up right then. We did hard labor. We did difficult things.
Never fought, never thought, never taught, never.
I believe if it's a strong enough cause that jail, if it has to go to that, then jail will be there.
It's a good country, but we could be a whole lot better.
Counter Histories, Rock Hill, a Tomorrowpictures Inc. production.
All right, so we are going to dive right in with Frederick, and hopefully he's going to come to the front of this. We've already done a sound check with him, so we should be good to go. So Frederick, and now that we've all kind of seen that, could you really just summarize Counter Stories for us and kind of what you learned both while you were researching, directing it, and actually spending time with the Friendship 9 during this process of creating this documentary? Let me find him. Sorry. Okay, looks like I'm unmuting him. We'll give a second.
Yes.
Okay, there he is.
How about now? Am I here?
Yes, great. Welcome. Welcome
Yes,
to Winthrop.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for having me, of course. This is all very exciting. And especially working with your athletic program and on a day like this where athletics and political discourse have intersected, which we can sort of unpack that a little bit later on in this talk. You had asked about the film itself, and the basic idea of the film is it's 9 college students that decide they're as mad as heck and they're not going to take it anymore, and they're going to stand up to the system in spite of whatever political social mores had been there in the past. They were unconcerned about what has gone on in their town 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. They were really focused in the here and now, which is extraordinary because one of the reasons people go to college is to think about their future, and they don't really sometimes think about, like, what can I do and impact the world I'm living in now. So January 31st, 1961, they decided to walk down to the McQuarries on Main Street in Rock Hill and sit at the counter and basically see what would happen. And what happened was that they were arrested because it was illegal to be of African descent and walk into a diner and sit down at the counter and order food. You were only allowed to come in and order from the back and eat it out in the back part of the building near the dumpster. That was the deal. That was the social more. That was what was sort of socially agreed upon. Just as in the world we live in, we socially agree upon we're not going to go through the crosswalk until the light is green. There are other types of social mores in the past where people were put at odds with their own environments and society. Ironically, literally, it was almost 100 years to the day from the time that South Carolina seceded from the Union in November of 1860, that John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. And that just sort of gives you an indication of, you know, the power of this. And don't underestimate the historical significance of Rock Hill, South Carolina as well. And unfortunately, you know, the way things are kind of set up, you know, it's fallen through the cracks a little bit. And that was one of the big motivations in doing this film. I had been offered the opportunity to focus on some social justice issues in some other cities that were a little bit more known or a little bit more common. And this one was the one that drew me in because it was the unknown story. It was a story that wasn't discussed as much. And then this one was about college students specifically, and a group of people that went from being friends to being great lifelong friends as well. The research, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and to think that that's 60 years ago, that in our very same town, those 9 students felt that they needed the respect so much because their money was good there and they could get their food and take it out back to eat, but not sit at the counter, like you said.
Absolutely. And 60 years later, multimillionaires that play in the NBA, you know, are essentially doing the same thing. You know, they're good enough to play basketball, but they want to be good enough to be citizens of the United States as well. And so they are essentially doing the same thing. It's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out as well. And so we all stand on the shoulders of some really great people. And so that alone justifies a tremendous amount of research into their lives and who they were as well. So it was really sort of an exploration of the town, the dynamics at that particular time. Rock Hill was very divided along racial and cultural lines. Literally, the train tracks split the town in half, and you either lived on the white side or the black side, and it was obvious which side that you were on. And in many ways, at times, one of the things I noticed in doing the project there was that there were still citizens that were living in that space. Like, you would meet people that were older that were still living on the white side or living on the black side, and they rarely crossed paths, which is also a fascinating dynamic too, that these ideas of being segregated or separating ourselves get embedded into our culture. We start thinking, well, this is the way it's supposed to be, and we don't envision ourselves as anything else but what the system is telling us. It's almost like existing in a matrix-like state. You know, don't underestimate the ability of your surrounding communities to be able to herd individuals knowingly and sometimes unknowingly as well.
So let's talk about that dedication and that decision that those 9 students made. As we saw, and I'm sure you can explain further, the jail no bail concept. I mean, they were committing to going to jail for 30 days, whether they had to get their academic affairs in order, let alone, you know, their social and personal affairs, and really some training that they did for the non-violent approach that they took to sitting there. And as we heard one of them say in the trailer, just being prepared for what was going to come next. So we're surrounded by college students on this call, or on this in this forum. Yes. So let's talk about that dedication that you saw, and you got to hear from these men that they made that decision as college students sitting in the same chairs that our students are today.
It's fascinating because, you know, they were willing to sacrifice school and their education and 30 days of it. Whereas, you know, right now we exist in a pandemic and we're all forced to sacrifice it. But imagine doing it willingly and then going to jail and then accepting a felony on your record. And these gentlemen had a felony on their record for 54 years. When you have a felony, you can't vote, you can't leave the country, you can't get a good job. They literally sacrificed their lives for us to be able to be free, essentially. You know, these are the people that you should also salute and say thank you for your service, you know. And that was one of the things that was really very profound. And the concept of jail no bail was that the system was making a lot of money off of oppressing people. Surprise, surprise. You know, they seem to be still pretty good at it today as well. But what would happen is exactly. You would live in this apartheid state. You would stand up to it. You would get arrested. You'd be sent to jail. You'd be charged a bond to get out of jail, and they would take and keep that money. So they would make money off of you going to jail. The same way that we have a penal system set up in this country now where it's privatized and people make money off of it as well. So they don't care if you go to jail. And in fact, they're kind of encouraging and they're kind of looking for an excuse to send you to jail. So back then you could sneeze standing on a street corner and someone would arrest you and you'd have to pay your way out of jail and they would just be picking your pocket. So they decided the only way to really stand up to the system was to go to jail and then refuse bail and be forced to stay in jail, which then started to hemorrhage their system because they've got to pay to keep you there. And these individuals were sent to work camps. And if any of you know anything about history and work camps, especially in the South, they were not fun places. I mean, you were out there in the middle of the hot sun, you know, laying train tracks or busting up rocks in a quarry or something like that. This was not pleasant stuff. And they were willing to tough this out for a principle and a purpose.
And I saw in the piece, because I was fortunate enough to be able to watch it, and I thank you for that, Frederick, but the 42 went through the prep, and then as we know, we ended up with the Friendship 9. I mean, I think that just shows the calling that was out there for college students,
Sure.
and then how special this group of 9 men were.
Exactly. You know, think about it this way, you know, that's about, you know, 25% of the people that said they would come showed up. Imagine in college, you throw a party and only 25% of the people that said they're going to come are going to show up. That's never going to happen. And this is one of the things that we have to think about as young people and as college students and things like that, is that you have to be willing to get out there on your own. So the probability of you standing up for something that really means a lot to you, you know, 75% of the people aren't going to show up to support you, and you're still going to have to move on and march on. And are you prepared to do that? You know, that not everybody is going to be willing to sacrifice themselves. And even though they're not, doesn't mean that you should not. And that's what makes all of this so courageous. And that must have been something that was very jarring to them that day. They thinking, oh yeah, 42 people are going to show up, and then only 10 show up. And then they decide, we're still going to do this. That's remarkable as well. So at the same time, you know, fast forwarding to the year 2020, you know, as a college student, what are you prepared to do today to sacrifice for something that's a greater concept than yourself in the here and now, in real time, with maybe only 25% of the world watching you do it? I mean, we live in a world where everybody is so concerned about who's looking at them, who's watching them, how many likes they have, you know, how many followers they have. They're looking for the bigger number. And I think anybody here that's on this call can tell you this, that some of the most interesting things that you find on the internet through social media are sometimes people with very low numbers of likes and followers. And they're doing things that are really meaningful. You know, at times, you know, people will follow someone that is attractive looking before they'll follow someone that is actually being profound and saying something that's beneficial to their existence.
And so let's talk about how meaningful the Friendship 9 were when you looked that they were a catalyst for freedom riders, the
Yes.
Civil Rights Act of 64. And so when you look at, and I know just from communicating with you through this process, Representative John Lewis's recent passing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you were in DC during some of those of his homecoming. That talk about what kind of led you to do this work, to tell these stories and the importance of our city in that full, when you look at the big picture of the civil rights movement that went on then, and as you said, is still going on in this country now.
I think it has a lot to do with what's going on now and what's been going on, to be perfectly frank, over the past several years with the current administration. I mean, from the start, there have been a lot of questions about the authenticity of the current administration, and is the current administration interested in the vast majority of people in America, or are they more interested only in their small sector of individuals? That is the gateway to an apartheid state, or segregation, or oppression, and all of these things that we've allegedly said we've left in the past. And we've discovered very quickly that that's not true, you know, and these issues with law enforcement. And we have grown as a society. So when any unarmed citizen is assaulted by law enforcement, it is an assault against all citizens. And at times, corrupt regimes that have unfortunately gotten into power in this country, they've really tried to capitalize on the idea that we are segregated, that we do view ourselves as differently. We are judging ourselves based on the color of our skin rather than the content of our character. And what they've discovered is that that's not true. The opposite is true. We actually do judge each other in mass based on the content of our character. And I think a big part of that has been the growth of our society in the past 60 years. And it's this acceleration that has happened since the internet, and then accelerating again with social media. I'm sure everyone on this call has their favorite social media people that they follow, and I bet you all of them have an eclectic mix of people of all different backgrounds and cultures and genders and gender identity. Like, it's all there. That's who we really are as a society. We're not this siloed society that it's all one group of people that only like one thing.
So let's talk about some of the characters, or I mean, it was Brother David Boone, and we saw him in the trailer there. And during the documentary, the Friendship Nine call him their Caucasian friend. I mean, quote, That's exactly what they call him. So yeah, I'd like to classify him as a white ally for them. Hopefully, please let me know if you think that's correct. And then, so what did he mean to him then? And then what do white allies mean now in 2020 to our brothers, sisters, friends, people who we love of color?
Right. Brother David Boone was ahead of his time, obviously. If Brother David Boone was around now, he'd be a really cool guy, that would have many different types and kinds of friends. Brother David Boone was one of the kinds of people that could see the future, but he was sort of out of time. His values were on time, but he physically was out of time. In the film, it's quoted that someone said that was the most hated man in South Carolina. Circling back with John Lewis again, John Lewis came to Rock Hill to support the Friendship Nine and took a beating at the bus station. And this man just recently passed away. And I think 100 years from now, the focus is going to be more on men like Brother David Boone and John Lewis. They're going to become of equal volume to people like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King are sort of our rock stars of all of this. But as we become more sophisticated and can unpack this era on a deeper level, we're going to discover a lot of regular, everyday people that were heroes. And that's who Brother David Boone was. And in my opinion, in spite of the fact he's passed away, still is. I mean, this is someone that really resonates. So we should never apologize for saying a white ally, because we need white allies for Black people. We need Black allies for Latino people. We need Latino allies for Asian people. We need Asian allies for the LGBTQ community. And we need everybody to support women and children as well. I mean, these are very deep resonating issues. If the white ally construct or paradigm sort of gets the ball rolling, then, so be it, And so for Brother David Boone in 1961 to stand shoulder to shoulder with these guys, almost 100 years to the day that South Carolina seceded from the Union and kicked off the Civil War, that's a phenomenal accomplishment and achievement as well. It makes you stop and rethink what the world is or what life is really all about. And I had the pleasure of meeting him and being around him.
Yes, and you said you were the first person to ever interview him. Talk about that,
exactly.
This whole storytelling,
which is shocking. I mean, it's like you're walking in the Himalayas and you run upon a monk living in a cave somewhere, and no one's ever talked to this person who knows everything. That's who this guy was. We've lived far too long in a society where we don't really talk to people that have a lot of know. There are people that we meet in our lives that are just like, wow, that's just a really smart or wise or intelligent person. That person knows what they're talking about. Brother David Boone was one of those people. And in spite of whatever the other gentleman could have felt being African American, they intuitively knew that Brother David Boone was on their side. They trusted their instincts. And in life, when you trust your instincts, you can never be wrong. They opened their hearts up to him because his heart was open to them. And I think that that's really the key here, is our ability to be able to go through life with an open heart in front of anybody, in front of everybody, and that's what frees us up to be able to have the courage to stand up to things such as this, and unfortunately at times people will misinterpret it as violent acts or terroristic acts or whatever, or you're against the flag or you're against the country, but in your heart what the truth is. David, Brother Boone knew in his heart what the truth was, in spite of everything else going on around him.
So even with the way that you explain that, talk to us a little bit about how important is it that this story is told through your lens as a director of color, like that intention there, a man of color directing this piece. And then on top of that, so talk first, about counter histories, but then now also, how can we be more intentional about taking in media, film, TV, authors, and artists of color to like I said, get these different perspectives and these lenses to appreciate the world that's out there through?
Yeah, I mean, we have to make an effort in life to, seek and you will find. I mean, you've got to put yourself out there, and, you have to consider someone else's voice. Unfortunately, in the past in media, African Americans haven't had the opportunity to express themselves, even in telling their own stories. Their stories have been told for them and been told in a way that's demeaning. As great of a performance Hattie McDaniel has in Gone with the Wind, and how great of a film it is, at the end of the day, we were promoting an idea of a subversive society. And not saying that Hattie McDaniel wasn't a great person, and she was. And she actually wasn't from the South. She was, a part of the Harlem Renaissance, and she was a very well-educated, intelligent, articulate woman who was playing a slave. A mammy, exactly. Some of the greatest performances by Black actors playing demeaning characters, these are unbelievably intelligent people. And so it's really about giving people an opportunity. So for me, this is an opportunity to create a new voice, a new platform, or a new way of absorbing history. And this is a part of American history. And that's why you should make the effort to know. We should know that about George Washington crossing the Delaware, but we should also know about the greatness of James Baldwin. We need to know about Lincoln, but at the same time, read something by Maya Angelou. One of the great, there's things like I Don't Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, which is an incredibly powerful piece about, in spite of the fact that something can be oppressed and be caged and be held down, that there is this incredible human spirit that's always in there, that is always wanting to get out. And that's one of the other reasons that you go to college, is to figure out where your spirit lies, and it's such a time of change and sort of blooming as an individual, because you find out who you are, what your voice is, what you think, what you believe. And the only way you're going to find that out is to expose yourself to other cultures, and not only African American culture, but women's studies, LGBTQ studies, Asian studies, Latino studies. If they find Martians on Mars, then Martian studies too. I mean, we need to know about the universe if we want to continue to travel through it.
Well, and speaking about traveling through it and telling those stories and your lens, tell us what other projects you're working on currently, or really just since Counter Stories.
Things that are sort of inspired by the same idea of the social emancipation of people. One of them is a story about a transgendered child who I've been filming from the age of 9 to the age of 14. It's called Transmission.Love. There's another project that I'm doing right now, which is called Pre-Existing Freedom. And it's been all about COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement and social justice in 2020 as well. I have another limited video series, which is it's called Trump's Children. I interviewed a group of high school and college students in 2016 about Donald Trump. And I found it to be extraordinarily fascinating because there was so much information they did not have, and they were making decisions based on a limited scope of information and just what they were learning from their parents. And so I just recently released it, and it's been fascinating for people to see what people were thinking 4 years ago. And a lot of things that seemed innocuous at that time now seem very frightening and very real. Another project about 2 Jewish men that play the blues called the Holy Brothers. They're 2 60-year-old Jewish guys that really know how to play music. And they are incredibly, incredibly influenced by African-American culture. And I think right now the discourse about African-Americans and Jewish Americans in this country is something that has also come to the surface during the time of COVID as well, you know, in social media and in discussing social justice and things like that. So there's many things that we really need to focus on and unpack. And then another project is called American Asian. And it's all about the differences between Asian American people and people from Asia. And the leap is massive. There's so much, work that a lot of Asians that come here have to do to be able to assimilate. And then the struggle to maintain their own cultural center, because, the West is very vacuous. We want everyone to abandon who they are. I mean, and that includes Italians and Irish people and Germans and, everybody, you can't be that anymore. You've got to be this other American thing, which is kind of weird because it's a construct that's been created that's only existed for about 250 years. And what exactly is that? And it's never been consistently welcoming to everyone. And then you're supposed to buy into that. And by the way, abandon who you once were. And, Asian culture is as deep and as complex as any culture. And I would argue at times probably more complex and more sophisticated, just based on their views of medicine and holistic thought and things like that. Things that we're only now adopting into our culture. They've been doing for thousands of years. And so we don't want them to abandon those things. We want to be able to celebrate those things along with them. So that's another film. So those are the films that I'm doing now. So Counter Histories was something that really started to just ignite all of this. And I've been on this 5-year run of making films about people that people normally don't pay enough attention to.
Well, and so before we open up for questions from the group, you tell
Yes.
a great story about walking up and down the halls of Winthrope recruiting students, because even in the trailer there, some of those young men we saw were students from Winthrop.
They were students. Yeah, they were students.
So tell the group that story, because it's really great. And then we're going to go into questions.
Right.
And I actually already have one in the chat that I'm going to lead off with that came to me anonymously.
Right. The vast majority of those individuals that are in that film are from Winthrop, where they were in the theater program. And I needed Black males, and I needed Black males that had a stage presence and some type of acting training and movement as well. Because, the evolution of African Americans in America is fascinating, just even on the level of movement. Black people from the 19th century moved different than Black people from the 20th century. Black people from the mid-20th century move differently than people now. I mean, just everything has been changing and evolving with African Americans because they've been in quest of their identity. So I needed good Black male actors who could act like Black guys from 1961. So I had to go around and sort of troll and creepily observe Black males in the theater department to figure out which ones I could shape and mold into being these characters. So I would be running into classrooms, stopping people in the hallway, running into a bathroom, asking people awkward questions and things like that. So I looked like a lunatic, you know, and then trying to explain to them, no, it's just for a film. But wait a minute, no, it's not that kind of film. No, it's a film it's a really good film. It's a documentary film. It's a documentary drama. You know, I need you to play a gentleman from 1961, you know, that was a part of the Friendship Nine. And I would say the Friendship Nine. And then they would say, oh, I think I've heard of that before. And then that would kind of lure them in. There's some really great audition outtakes where we're all together reciting Shakespeare and stuff like that. Because I needed the regalness. I needed, I needed that level of dignity that these men had in the face of oppression, you know, which is a tall order. I mean, it's easy to throw a rock at the cops. It's really hard to stand there with dignity in the face of oppression. And I needed young men that could, you know, walk with their heads held high as well, and could compartmentalize. So that's how I ended up with all of these guys from Winthrope. And so it turned into sort of this story of legend to me, running around on campus, you know, gang tackling black guys to get them to be in my film.
And honestly, when I first reached out, it really showed what a special place Winthrop has in your heart because of what those students did to make this film a reality.
Absolutely. I've fallen in love with the university. I have fantasies about coming there and being an adjunct faculty member someday. So I love the place, and I just think it's a very interesting place. It's got a tremendous history to it, and it's one of those things that, you know, as much as you might think you know South Carolina, you don't really know South Carolina, you know, and I like that. I enjoy that you know, Winthrope for a very long time has been a fast forward thinking institution, and those are the kinds of things I want to be associated with.
Awesome. Well, at this point, I'm going to stop the recording so that we can have this brave and safe space for questions.
Don't change that station while we pause for a brief commercial break.
This is Tomorrowpictures.TV.